Hello and welcome to another Big Mish movement workshop. An important topic today, I'm here to talk about why we should stop stretching our hamstrings and start building them instead. So let me break it down. First of all, let's talk about why hamstrings are actually very important to us. They're very important in stabilizing our pelvis, grounding our pelvis. They provide a tremendous amount of real estate attachment on each side ischium of the pelvis, and therefore with every step that you take as your hip goes forward, they're powerful grounders of each side as we make contact with the floor. So that kind of breaks it down that they're actually a really important muscle, just as important as the glutes, quads, and adductors. Hamstrings are probably even more important just because of how they initiate even that heel strike, heel contact when we walk. That's what tends to connect to our pelvis. So that's pretty important, pretty big deal. Hamstrings, for most people, feel uncomfortable. Most people feel tight, and most people assume, well, if I'm feeling tight, I need to stretch, and so that they just stretch, and nothing ever gets better. Furthermore, we also need to talk about how stretching could be damaging the hamstrings' integrity. So, like I said, hamstrings are powerful stabilizers of the pelvis. They ground to the bottom of the pelvis. Every time you take a step, they're making sure that you heel contact and everything secures in, and then you go in through your swing cycle of the gait cycle, whatever. So we need some support there, and when we're feeling tight, what we're gonna do is we're just gonna stretch, and here's basically the thing about stretching, the myth of stretching. Stretching, although it might elongate the muscle, provide a little bit of blood flow, for the time being it feels good, but after a while those effects wear off. And what you have done with this practice of stretching the muscle is that you actually deactivate it. You make it weaker. You basically take it out of a good leverage position and take it into a lax position. And muscles need to work. Muscles are there for force. They're meant to handle force. And so if they're very flimsy, that's not going to do us any good. So the thing with stretching, whether you want to stretch or not, the thing is you want the muscles to relax, but you want them to work. And I think that's a big missing thing with stretching, is that they make the muscle relax, but they definitely don't make it work. So that's a big problem with stretching. Why are our hamstrings feeling so tight? So most human beings in a natural spinal and pelvis position will have a forward tilting pelvis coupled with a curved spine. A couple of reasons for this, but one reason is that this makes sense for us gravitationally. When we are assuming we are forward progressing human beings, because we do walk forward, it makes sense for us to have a slightly forward tilted pelvis and an arched back, because that allows us the leverage and ease to go forward. The trouble is that people fall too far into this anterior pelvic tilt position, and then we're getting way too much extension in our back. And so what is happening then is that because our pelvis is tilting forward, it puts the hamstrings in a already stretched, uncomfortable, deleveraged position. If you think this is neutral right here, forward tilting pelvis, what's attached here at the back is getting pulled up, and those are very much your hamstrings. And so our pelvic position is probably pretty much the reason, A, why your hamstrings feel tight, but B, why we're not able to get our hamstrings going in future, because we're always stuck in this forward position. So what does this come down to? Well, a couple of things. First of all, strengthen biomechanics. Like I said, we need to definitely have strength in the hamstrings, and if our heel is never really making contact with the floor, our hamstring's not really gonna ever initiate even when we're walking, and it's supposed to actually activate slightly when we're walking. We, very much because of this forward tilting pelvis position and our overly extended back, tend to be on our toes a lot, and that pretty much disrupts the whole cycle and puts your hamstrings even more into a state of dysfunction, not able to engage smoothly or any of that matter. Because why? You're always on your toes, and therefore you're using your toes and your quads, your lower back to push you forward, and you're never able to bring this neutrality and more stability to the pelvis and your walking gait cycle, walking forward locomotor movement patterns. And so the other thing we need to know about hamstrings is that typically when we strengthen hamstrings, you see the machine where you curl your heel up to your glutes, the hamstring curl machine. And while that very much does actually engage the hamstring, and that is how our hamstring contracts to a degree, muscles, all muscles have triplanar ability. So just because that's the A to B way a muscle contracts, functionally, sometimes things work a little bit differently. With the hamstrings in particular, when we walk, which is probably one of the most important movements we need to be able to do, we have to be able to walk from A to B. You gotta be able to go feed yourself, go to work, get out of bed. So when we walk, we want our heel, again, like I said, to strike the ground, and that's when we want our hamstring to engage. And because we don't have that sensation, we're not good at that, we're too forward tilted in our pelvis, we're on our toes all the day, we're never able to make that heel contact. And so if you don't ever even train your hamstrings to engage with heel contact, they will never really learn to function that way. And that's my only little beef with the hamstring curl exercise, is there you're training the hamstring to get shorter as it's getting stronger, but functionally as we take a step, the hamstring is getting longer, and then when it makes contact with the floor is when you want it to be its strongest. And that most likely will be almost at full length, not quite. So that's one of the things we want to think about with hamstring strength and biomechanics, is this concept of heel strike, because of how important that is for walking, running, and forward locomotive movement. We want our hamstrings to be able to engage when we strike our heel to the floor. And so that's one of the reasons I think it's important to train that way. I've done a tutorial on this bit in the past. I've done a couple. One's the hemi bridge, the other one's the supine hook line progressions. I can link both of those in the show notes so you can see what is a good way for us to activate our hamstrings with heel contact. The next big one is breathing. So breathing's a big one of how our muscles feel. When we feel tight all over, good chances are we're not breathing well at all. Interesting enough, also, poor breathing is very much associated with poor posture. Poor posture usually is what we tend to associate with this overly extended, forward tilting pelvis, hamstrings in an elongated state, is what's coupled with bad breathing. And usually why? Because we're really overly reliant on our back for inhalation. Our diaphragm is overly inflated. The diaphragm's in an overly facilitated position, just simply because habitually, time in, time out, 22,000 plus reps a day is what we take of breaths per day. If that's not going well, you're going to facilitate a lot of tension throughout your body. And that's going to resonate down to the hamstrings, whether it's due to your pelvis position or the fact that you're just not breathing well. Which is why it's so important that if we're feeling tight, you got to check your breathing. If you're breathing well, and that's like I said with these previous exercises, if you go check them out, one of the most important things with that is that we have heel contact on the ground. We're activating hamstrings with heel contact in the ground, and we're making sure we're breathing calmly. This is a really important thing, that our bodies just gets really out of this rhythm because we're so on the go, we're so fast, rapid, quick breath, always going forward because we're trying to get to the next goal, whatever it is, stress on our toes all the time. And so we lose a lot of this balance that we need, which breathing very much brings back. And when we connect that with the heels, that is what grounding is. We are grounding ourselves, and hamstrings are the biggest grounders of our pelvis, which is what kind of connects all of that together. Another little side topic, shoes. Again, if you got bad shoes that are always putting you on your toes, sometimes this could be connected with your biomechanical problems. Maybe sometimes you're very healthy and you're just buying bad shoes. If you're putting yourself on your toes all day long in shoes, You're not going to find your heels easily, you're not going to engage your hamstrings well, and therefore every time when you take steps walking, your calves are going to be probably pushing a little bit harder, your quads and your back's probably going to be working a little bit harder. We want heel contact as the heels ground our pelvis, and that allows us to get more symmetry, healthier movement, and not so much of this push, push, push all the time, which is very tiring. Almost there. So then the other thing, the main thing you want to ask yourself is, are my hamstrings strong at all? And most of the time we neglect them in our training program. Why? Like I just said, we're always push, push, push. We're thinking of pushing all the time. Hamstrings are a little bit different, and it's a little bit more associated with control, stability, grounding. That's kind of what hamstrings are for. So it's important to take time out of your workout plan and make sure I am working on that. Am I working on hamstrings with my heel engaged into the ground, or on that concept of getting longer but stronger as opposed to getting shorter and stronger? Because the way the hamstring works is as you get longer, that's when it needs to contract. So whether you do hamstring sliders, the exercises I mentioned, which I'll link, we've also got a lot of hip hinge variations that are also going to activate the hamstrings, or even any deep lunge variations also going to be good for the hamstrings. I like to mix all of that in, so long as we're getting into good deep ranges, good hip hinges, and good deep squat positions, we're going to get good hamstring activation with our leg on our leg days. So that's really important. And then the last important point I really want to make is, instead of stretching, think about this: how well are we moving throughout our range with control? So as opposed to just, let's say, lying on your back and just pulling your leg back and stretching, how about doing a more of a active controlled stretch, so that you, let's just say you engage your leg muscle by stretch out your leg muscle by engaging your quad, and then you pull it back in so that you engage some hamstring. Then repeat, engage the quad, get a little bit higher, more of a stretch, and then pull it back in. And so you see that little sort of mixing it back and forth, so that you're not just passively stretching the muscle from A to B, but maybe actively stretching it, pulling it back in, stretching it, pull it back in. Those are some good ones that I like. Or even if I do use a hamstring slider and I do a split stretch, I'll slide my leg out as far as possible, and then I'll slide my leg in, try not to use my hand. Active stretching is what I usually tend to recommend a lot more if you are somebody that says, I really want to stretch my hamstrings. Think of something more active, but don't forget all the other stuff, which I'm about to recap for you right now. 3 points. Hamstrings need to support the pelvis. So stretching deactivates muscles. If you are going to stretch, let's provide some support. There, I've got a couple of exercises that you can check in the description to help you out with that. Breathing affects position and how tense your muscles feel. So if you're feeling really tense and all that and out of whack, before you start stretching, do a couple of breathing exercises. Get your heels in contact with the floor and do some deep breathing and feel all of that connecting together. Ground yourself. Then let's see about stretching and all that. And then number 3, as I just alluded to, heel contact allows your hamstrings to be grounded. And when they are grounded, that allows them to work their best. Heel contact, sometimes, when we're wearing shoes, we're not going to get that, whatnot. What I'm trying to say is, it's a conscientious thing that when you're doing your leg workouts and whatnot, especially when you're trying to get this hamstring to be stronger, think about engaging that heel down to the ground, engaging that hamstring as you execute your movement. Very important. As much as we think the hamstring works by pulling the heel up, yes, the more important way it's going to work is as it strikes the ground and controls all of that motion and supports your pelvis. So food for thought on that one. Heel contact is what's the best thing to get our hamstrings to be most active while we walk, run, and work out. Hopefully you enjoyed these tips. Please don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel if you want more of these tutorials. This is a big one. Stop stretching your hamstrings all the time. Start building them up because they are what grounds your pelvis. Go ground yourself today. I'll see you next time. Bye for now.